From millions of copies sold in the 90s to now less than 1,000 active players across the whole genre, this is anti-gravity racing. Let's begin where we left off. F-Zero Gex is known as the hardest racing game ever made, and yet it is widely considered as the pinnacle of AGR. It's one of the more well-known games of the sub-genre after all, and you've likely already seen many videos saying nothing but good things about it, with the exception of the difficulty. I, however, am going to approach things differently. Not just to avoid creating another generic Gex is awesome but hard video, but also because, despite what the internet says, this game is actually dumbed down a lot. It might sound like my videos are rage bait, but these are genuinely what I think and the reasoning behind them. On the surface, Gex looks like an improved version of X. You have plenty of ships described by 4 main stats, tracks that get harder with each passing Grand Prix, 30 opponents, strafing, side attacking, spin attacking, brief aerial control, sacrificing your health for speed boosts, and lots of speed. But there is one small design choice that I would say is bringing the whole game down. The tracks are wider. Wider tracks means you can take corner at higher speeds, which means grip is less important. Wider tracks mean you're less likely to hit other opponents, which means body strength and combat are less important. It means you're less likely to hit walls, which also means the game's easier. It's why you made horizontal strafing so strong, but it doesn't explain why ships recharge faster now. They really shouldn't when boost is the only important stat left. Unless you want to make the game even easier. You wanted players to go fast without putting much effort. That's what F-Zero is about after all. But if you're always going fast, you're actually not moving at all. You added corners, but also added a quick turn mechanic that allows every ship to take every corner completely flat out with minimal speed loss, which means heavy ships have a little downside now. And it's a letdown considering that the ships now have a lot more character and feel distinct, whereas X ships didn't differ much aside from the 4 main stats. Still, at least they were accurate. They lazily copied the ship stats from X, but the new physics mean that most of them are now meaningless. Visually speaking, the drag oval in Gex is about twice as wide as X. Even if we ignore the track's Mario Kartified width, they're still lazy. This exact same 90-degree corner, for example, appears over 40 times. Track design. Remember when you had to maintain magnetic grip when riding cylinders? Not anymore. There are some unique tracks, but now the game isn't designed around them. Sharp corners, the camera is too narrow and slow to follow them. A track that isn't a glorified airstrip, the strafing is now too strong for it. So at least they put them on analog triggers, but there's a 10% dead zone on everything now, even if you set it to 0. Not that you'll need to smoothly steer anyways. It still matters, but to a much lesser extent when compared to X. The game now uses some sort of autopilot when you're in air, and the pitch control is less responsive. You can lose grip on purpose by holding both strafe buttons, but why would I do that when I can quick turn every corner and spam side attack like a maniac? Someone looked at this cooldown and thought it wouldn't be totally abused. Even though the physics are more complex, the game is mechanically less challenging, and even the exploits that some people like to call advanced techniques are easier to perform. Arab drifting, for example, turns the game into easy mode as long as you're willing to sacrifice your wrist and your gamepad, as you'll be mindlessly wiggling it left and right. Most of the game has been an improvement otherwise. It's just been dumbed down and tuned poorly, with lazy tracks that won't let the game fully realize its potential. It's clear that all the effort went into making them look good instead. Gex still visually holds up today and goes hard with the vibes. But I'm playing a game here, and a racing one at that. It's a genre where raw graphics matter the least, and for some reason companies treat them as graphics showcases. And I guess it works. During editing I kept looking at the gameplay thinking, wow, this looks awesome, maybe I was wrong about this game. But then I get back to actually playing it and realize it's not that amazing. We're not done though, cause Gex introduces a brand new story mode, which is a fancy word for driving missions, cause let's be real, there's no story here. Or in any racing game. This mission is why Gex is known to be the Dark Souls of racing games. Took me 7 attempts. It's a head-to-head race with rocks falling onto the track, and it does seem challenging at first, but then you realize the rocks are scripted, so once you learn their pattern, you just cruise to the end of the level. It's the same with every other mission really, except for this destruction one where you also need a bit of luck. The real challenges are the hardest difficulty that leaves little room for mistakes, but even then, this is one of the easier missions. Though it is also the second one, so I assume most people got stuck and didn't get to play the rest. But why? Mafia introduced racing to people who never played racing games, and Driver gave you objectives that only English-speaking car guys understood. But Gex? I don't know. Maybe you didn't get to pick games to buy as a kid. Or maybe you looked at the characters in the cover and thought it's some fighting game. Oh god. Still, it's clear that most people don't know how to handle vehicles in video games. They expect them to be slow and responsive like a human character, and not something with loss of power and limited grip. Additionally, games have become easier over time, which means something even remotely challenging is going to look out of place. That's why Gex is known as the hardest F-Zero game, despite actually being easier than X and the original F-Zero. Hell, it even sold fewer copies. It really shouldn't be this infamous. But that's just a theory, and maybe you can provide a better one. Despite the skill issue, the difficulty, most people say Gex is the best F-Zero game. But let's actually see why that's the case. We have 6 F-Zero games in total. 4 of which are much simpler 2D games made for weaker hardware, which leaves us with 2 3D games for a fairer comparison. One of these games couldn't be played properly without the original hardware for 25 years, so yeah, Gex wins the one-man race. It just hurts knowing how much better Gex would have been with little effort. The driving is poorly tuned, but enjoyable otherwise, the missions offer something fresh while still being fun and challenging, and even the ship creator benefits from the new physics. Just like Pod Racer, Gex was still a great experience first time around. But even Pod Racer had many slow corners despite being known as one of the fastest racing games ever and also taking place in large open areas. With how little competition there is, Gex is still near the top of my AGR list, but I'd rather go back to X when I want to play F-Zero. Still, could have been worse, they could have made it even easier, and if Mario Crap is anything to go by, it would have resonated better with the casual audience, leading to more popularity. This game ended up selling so poorly that a sequel was never considered. Things weren't any better for F-Zero's main competitor either. While F-Zero would focus on wide, high-speed tracks, light handling, and physical combat, Wipeout would instead go for tighter, technical tracks, weighty handling, and weaponized combat. This would be the last time that these two flagship AGR franchises would go against each other, and it wasn't even a contest. Just like Gex, Wipeout Fusion also seems to be a generational improvement over its predecessors. Higher frame rate, new modes, upgrade system, and a more diverse selection of tracks, each with different layouts, with some featuring split paths and off-road sections. Just one problem, the game is a floor hugger now. They got rid of gravity in the game that started anti-gravity in 3D. Though the elevations still have a small effect on the handling, and there are few jumps that all feel extremely awkward to take. The camera no longer follows the track, but the signature air brake handling is still here. This time the ships have more lateral inertia, but also can hold big slide angles like the previous games, making them more suited for wider and high-speed oriented tracks. The combat has remained identical, with new weapons that are either broken or pointless, which is why they only appear in this Wipeout game. Instead of speed classes, we now buy ship upgrades for the main campaign and can sell them at full price, which means you're not locked to using one ship. Ships unlock throughout the main campaign by defeating bosses in head-to-head battles. The racing is similar to Wipeout XL, with the game artificially keeping you in a pack of other racers. A big annoyance is that the barriers blocking the alternate layout are extremely hard to spot, and one of the new weapons is so overpowered, you're not gonna know if you got hit or is it the game that's glitching out. This is the buggiest Wipeout game overall, and is considered by many to be the worst one. It doesn't mean it's terrible, but rather disappointing for a game with Wipeout in its title. Though this game introduced something that became the standard in future Wipeouts, the zone mode. The accelerator is stuck down and you can't use both left and right air brakes simultaneously. Your objective is to simply survive as long as possible. The ship gets faster and faster over time, which means you will start hitting more and more walls and eventually run out of energy. This was a fun and addictive addition, but it wasn't enough to redeem the rest of the game. Thankfully, they got another 2 years to work on the next Wipeout game. Pure takes a step back to the original roots. Its new physics would eventually become the base for future modern Wipeouts, but here they've been made driftier to better mimic the trilogy handling, making Pure more of a middle ground. And of course, the gravity is back. And this time, in addition to pitching, the ships will also roll to align themselves with banked corners, something that wasn't possible in classic Wipeouts. Pit lanes have also been replaced with a power-up absorption mechanic. There's no progression and the amount of content can feel underwhelming, but they didn't stop after the release and kept adding to the game with free DLC. We got more ships and another Wipeout game's worth of tracks. Some are redesigns of the trilogy tracks and some are outright goofy. There's so much content here with all the DLC, if you ignore the pisstring plug that is. The game is running at 30 FPS despite it being capable of more with mods, and there are only 4 zone tracks. Otherwise, there isn't much to complain here for a handheld title. It seems like they finally mastered the original Wipeout formula with Pure, which might be why they made only one more real Wipeout game after it, called Pulse. We now have a progression system, featuring the usual race, time attack, and zone modes, but here comes a new deathmatch mode, where the goal is to kill as many opponents as possible. Except it comes down to who gets better weapon RNG and puts down the last shot on low health opponents. The biggest change is related to the handling, which has become much grippier. You can hardly slide now, with air brakes somewhat acting as secondary steering. A controversial change that was mostly carried through future Wipeout installments. I didn't initially know about it in Pure, but you can now spend energy to perform a stunt in air, giving you a speed boost. We also have the addition of side shifts, and unlike F-Zero, they put a sensible cooldown on them, thank God! In the end, Pulse and especially Pure were welcome additions, but they also weren't anything new or groundbreaking. They were simply more Wipeouts. The studio behind these games was also responsible for yearly Formula 1 games, and Wipeout was seemingly heading the same way. Just another sports game with regular re-releases that had basically nothing new. And that marks the end of F-Zero and Wipeout, both of which attempted new ideas going into the 6th generation. But of course, they weren't the only franchises around, so keep an eye out for the others in the next episode. If it's released, you can find it on the screen or in the description.